Our second reading is from the Gospel of Mark. Please do open up to page 904, because I would love you to follow along, Mark 15, and then we'll flip back to Psalm 22. So we'll flip in Mark 15 and Psalm 22, but let's have a look at Mark 15, verses 16 through to 32. This is obviously talking about Jesus. The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is the governor's residence, and called the whole company together. They dressed him in a purple robe, twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on him. And they began to salute him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They were hitting him on the head with a stick and spitting on him. Getting down on their knees, they were paying him homage. After they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple robe and put his clothes on him. They led him out to crucify him. They forced a man coming in from the country who was passing by to carry Jesus' cross. He was Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. They tried to give him wine. We mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. Then they crucified him and divided his clothes, casting lots for them to decide what each would get. Now it was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The inscription of the charge written against him was "the King of the Jews." They crucified 2 criminals with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by were yelling insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, Ha, the one who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Save yourself by coming down from the cross. In the same way, the chief priests with the scribes were mocking him among themselves and saying, "He saved others, but he cannot save himself. Let the Messiah, the King of Israel, come down from the cross so that we may see and believe." Even those who were crucified with him taunted him. This is the word of the Lord. Please do keep that open, page 904. The Easter story, Jesus' death on the cross. You probably know elements of it fairly well. But just to summarise, or just to have a little highlights thing, verse 17, they dressed him, look at verse 17, chapter 15, they dressed him in a purple robe, twisted together a crown of thorns. Verse 18, they began to hail him, King of the Jews, they were hitting him. Verse 20, they mocked him, stripped him. Verse 24, they crucified him. Just one sentence, very simple. They divided his clothes, casting lots, they decided what each would get. Verse 29, those who passed by yelling insults, mocking him, shaking their heads, "Save yourself by coming down from the cross." You know the story. But have you heard this before? I mean, before last Easter or before the last time you heard this story from Mark. Do you know this story about an innocent one who was punished? 1,000 years before Jesus, there was a king. We're talking about the crown and the purple robe and the mocking and the hail, King of the Jews. There was a king, King David, who was king over Israel. And there was a turn of events and he cries out to God. He senses God has abandoned him. Turn to page 482. So open up 482. And you can maybe keep your finger in page 904 if you can. We'll go back there, but 482. Have a look at Psalm 22. Have a look at verse 7. Page 482. Everyone who sees me mocks me. They sneer and shake their heads. Verse 16, look, dogs have surrounded me. A gang of evildoers closed into me. They pierced, what did they pierce? My hands and my feet. I don't think that is necessarily happening, but he's talking about his experience of verse 18. They divided my garments among themselves. They cast lots for my clothing. What's happening here? Have a look at the top of Psalm, the very first verse, because usually the Psalms, the summary of the whole Psalm is at the very beginning. Look at verse 1, Psalm 22. My God, why have you abandoned me? Why are you so far from my deliverance, from my words of groaning? Being mocked, surrounded by enemies, pierced, clothing abandoned, clothing divided. It's the same, similar story. But there's one key difference. There's one big difference between King David and what's happening there, being mocked and get pierced and garments divided, abandoned. And then the story of Jesus, what we're celebrating on the cross on Good Friday, there is one significant difference in the way the story ends. And this makes all the difference because this is what the whole significance of what Good Friday is all about, this difference. This opens up exactly what we're celebrating, what we're commemorating, what we're mourning, in a sense, this key difference between what was talking about with King David and what we're celebrating with King Jesus. And it's at the heart of Good Friday. And if you understand this difference, it'll open up exactly what Good Friday is all about, what it means for you, what it means for your life, what it means for us. We have to keep looking a little bit more at Psalm 22 and then Mark 15 to have a look. Have a look at what happens. What happens to the story of David? Look at Psalm 22, verses 1 to 21. We read 1 to 11. We've done a little bit of 1 to 21, dividing clothing, etc. But look at verse 22. Have a look at Psalm 22. What happens? What does it say there?
I've got to be careful with that. Often,
No, I often don't get the right verse, so I want to make sure I'm asking you, what does it say there? Not verse 22, what does it say there in verse 21? Psalm 22 at the end of verse 21. You would call it 21b, is what I think. You answered, oh, thank you, someone answered me. You answered me. But do you see the difference? You see what's happening here? David says, you answered me. I've been crying out. I've been abandoned. You answered me. And then look what happens in the next few verses. It's happened all throughout. What does he say? Okay, now it's verse 22. What does he say? I will proclaim your name. I will praise you in the assembly. Verse 24. He did not hide his face from him. He's talking about himself. Listened when he cried for help. Verse 25, I will praise you in the great assembly. You see what's happening? David was abandoned. Something was going on. He was crying out to God. But that's half of the psalm, you see. But the other half of the psalm, he's been answered. He's been delivered. And now he's witnessing to God. He's witnessing to people about what God has done. I will praise him. He listened when I cried for help. Verse 26, the humble will eat and be satisfied. Those who seek the Lord will praise him. May your hearts live forever. That's David, Psalm 22. He calls out, he's answered, he's vindicated, he's delivered. What happens with Jesus in Mark 15? We've seen the story about him being mocked, purple robe put on him, crown of thorns. He's crucified, they divide up his clothing. But what's the key difference? So it's not about the cross and just being crucified. It's what says it in one sentence. They don't even dwell on the physical agony or what Jesus is going through. What is it all about? What's the key significant difference between what happened with David? Have a look at Mark 15. Go back to Mark 15, page 904. He died. He was abandoned. Have a look at verse 33. I'll just take you through 33 through to 42. He died, but the difference is, look at what it says about his death. Look at what it says about him being abandoned. Look, verse 33. Darkness comes over the land. When it was noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. Something of cosmic proportions is happening. Darkness. Some people say it's 3 hours. Some people have said, it was a solar eclipse, perhaps. If you've had a solar eclipse, you know they last for a few minutes. This is hours. Others have suggested it was a dust storm, but we have the wet season during Passover. What's happening now is an inexplicable darkness. It's a supernatural darkness, and it's a symbol, a picture of God's judgment, of God's abandonment. Darkness falls, and we know that God is in judgment. But who is he judging? Look at verse 34, very next verse. At 3, after the darkness, Jesus cries out. And what does he say? Those words, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you abandoned me? You see what's happened here, and with Jesus is with David, he had felt abandoned, but God in the end delivered him. But no, with the cross, what's happening on Good Friday, the significance of it is that God does abandon Jesus. The darkness descends. Jesus cries out, my God, why have you abandoned me? And you know those words, my God, Jesus doesn't say, you know, in the Gospels, we've been looking through the Gospels, we've seen how Jesus' friends had deserted him, the disciples had deserted him, everybody had deserted him. Last week we saw about the naked man who fled and the symbol of everybody leaving him. He doesn't say, my friends on the cross. He doesn't say, my hands and my feet are in agony. No, he says, my God. And you know that word where we say my, it's that sense of intimacy. If you say my Susan or my John or my friend, it's a deep, deep sense of the one who he knows from all eternity has broken with him. You know, if someone after church this morning, if someone from the parish says to me, I never want to see you again, Brian, I never want to talk to you again, there's a sense of hurt from that. But if my wife says to me, you know, I never want to see you again, I never want to hear from you again, that goes a lot deeper, doesn't it? And here Jesus is saying, at the cross on Good Friday, the significance of it is, my God, my Father, the one who they have known each other from the beginning of all eternity. Jesus is losing the Father. The maker of the world is being unmade. And why is this all happening? Because the judgment that should have fallen on us is falling on the Son. And this is what's happening on Good Friday. And at the heart of the story, and what's different about David and Psalm David was answered, he was vindicated, God listened. The difference is in this story, Jesus is being abandoned fully. And he's being abandoned for us. And at the heart of Good Friday, the story is sacrifice. And some people will say, well, sacrifice, can't God forgive? If God can forgive, can't he just forgive and forget? You know, why do we have to have sacrifice? Why is there the need for sacrifice? But what sort of love is it without a cost? It doesn't mean anything, does it? If Jesus is a good example, or God says, I love you in a fluffy sense, but no, it actually costs him something. and we've all walked away from God, we've all ignored him, we've all done our own thing. And Good Friday shows us that the cost doesn't go away. Someone has to pay. And the wonderful news is that Jesus, the Son, takes on all of that, is abandoned fully so that we could walk into his presence, because the story doesn't end with the darkness and the abandonment. It's there, but look at verses 37 to 38. Jesus lets out a cry, breathes his last, and the curtain of the temple is torn in two from top to bottom. And you know, the curtain is not a flimsy little veil. It's a thick wall between us, you see, and between God in the Holy of Holies. And now, of course, it's saying we can walk right into God's presence, and it's torn from the top to the bottom to show who does this, who makes the way. And God is saying, through my Son Jesus and through this sacrifice, it's the one that ends all sacrifices, and now you can walk into the Father's presence. Anybody who believes in me, who trusts in me, who knows me, can now call God, as Jesus did, my God, my Father. Can now have forgiveness and grace and mercy and the knowledge that they have the Father at their side, that they are his children. And so I suppose really, finally, what do we think of, the question really is, what do we think of Good Friday? Do we recognise what God has done for us? Or do we see this as just another death? It's just, Jesus is just another death, but no, there was something else happening here. Because Mark shows us one person who really gets it. Immediately shows us someone who understands what's happening. Have a look, verse 39. We're almost there at the end. When the centurion who's standing here, he sees what happens. He sees Jesus breathe his last. And what does he say? Verse 39, truly this man was the Son of God. Now, consider that this centurion and who he is. This is someone who has risen up the ranks. He's a soldier. They're not picked from the elite. They're risen up the ranks. He has no doubt killed people. He's no doubt been brutal. He's hardened. And yet here he is. He's the one at the foot of the cross saying, there's something here. Up until now in Mark, no human has figured out who Jesus is. They're all saying, who is Jesus? Or even the disciples, those closest to him, no one's really figuring out who he is. And yet here we have this cynical one, probably this Roman soldier, and the spiritual darkness of his heart has been penetrated. You know, the Roman coins that they have, inscribed on the Roman coin is, what does it say? Tiberius Caesar, son of God, the divine. Because they're thought of as divine. And here we have a Roman centurion who's to pledge allegiance to Caesar, the son of God, the son of the divine. And for him, he sees something about Jesus' death that is unlike any others. The tenderness of Jesus despite the terror, the beauty of Jesus' death must have pierced right through the darkness into his heart, where he says, truly, surely this is the Son of God. The question is, what do we see in his death in Good Friday? Do we recognise what God has done for us? That this is about a story of cosmic proportions, not just another death, but a story of the one who turns his face away. The darkness envelops the land. All the punishment of the world is being laid on him, our own sin. But it's his life for us. What he takes on, his punishment, he takes on ours, he gives to us. His innocence and his guilt-free life and his forgiveness. So Good Friday is the message, of course, of the Son of God dying for us, but also the message of grace and of life. Let me pray. Father, thank you for your Son, Jesus. Help us recognise in your death there is life. Help us this week to take hold of your grace and of your goodness. And as we sing now of the Son in Jerusalem, help us to lift our hearts to you, to sing to you, to praise you. Help us to be touched by you and what you have done. Help us to dwell on the lyrics of what you have gone through and the story of you coming to Jerusalem, weeping over Jerusalem,